I came home from work on a Tuesday afternoon in Phoenix, Arizona, to find my garage door standing wide open and three of my heavy-duty generator extension cords missing from where I had organized them on the wall-mounted pegboard. The generator itself sat untouched in the corner, still secured with the cable lock I had installed last month, but those cords were nowhere to be seen. Each one had cost me over $100 because I needed the industrial-grade ones that could handle the load when the power went out during monsoon season. This was not how I expected my day to end. I stood there in my garage, staring at the empty hooks where the cords should have been, trying to make sense of what happened. My neighbor Tom was outside watering his lawn, so I walked over to ask if he had seen anything unusual. He shut off his hose and wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. "Actually, yeah," Tom said, squinting in the afternoon sun. "Barbara was here earlier with that new HOA compliance officer. They had a clipboard and were walking around taking notes. I saw them go into your garage around noon." My stomach dropped. Barbara Hendricks was the HOA president of our Sunset Ridge community, and she had made it her personal mission to nitpick every single homeowner into submission since taking office 6 months ago. The woman was in her late 40s, had that demanding haircut that screamed for a manager, and treated HOA rules like they were federal law. "They went into my garage," I asked, feeling my blood pressure rising. "Without my permission?" Tom nodded. "I thought maybe you had given them access or something. They were in there for maybe 10 minutes, then came out carrying some orange and black cords. Barbara was talking on her phone the whole time." I thanked Tom and walked back to my house, immediately pulling up the HOA covenant documents on my computer. Nowhere in the rules did it state that HOA officers could enter private property without permission, let alone take personal belongings. I grabbed my phone and called Barbara's number, which was listed on the community website. She answered on the third ring. "Barbara Hendricks speaking." "Barbara, this is Jake Newland from 4782 Desert Vista Drive. I came home today and found my garage door open and 3 of my generator extension cords missing. My neighbor said he saw you and someone else in my garage earlier." There was a pause, then she spoke in that condescending tone I had come to recognize. "Oh yes, Jake. We conducted a compliance inspection today. Those extension cords were in violation of HOA Code Section 12.7, which prohibits the storage of commercial-grade equipment in residential garages visible from common areas." "My garage door was closed," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "And those are my personal property. You cannot just take things from my home. The HOA has the authority to confiscate items that violate community standards," Barbara replied smoothly. "You will receive a formal notice in the mail. The items are being held at the HOA office. You may retrieve them once you pay the applicable fines and agree to proper storage compliance." "What fines?" I demanded. "And how did you even get into my garage?" "The garage door was already open when we arrived," she said, which was an obvious lie. "I always closed it before leaving for work. And the fine schedule is $200 per violation. Since you had 3 cords, that comes to $600 total, plus a storage compliance fee of $100. I was speechless for a moment. "You are telling me you want $700 to return my own property that you stole from my garage?" "We did not steal anything, Mr. Newland. We confiscated prohibited items. There is a difference. Good day." She hung up before I could respond. I sat there staring at my phone, unable to believe what just happened. This was theft, plain and simple. I did not care what Barbara called it or what imaginary authority she thought she had. I pulled up the HOA documents again and read through every single page. Section 12.7 did mention equipment storage, but it specifically referred to commercial vehicles and industrial machinery that could be seen from the street. Extension cords did not even come close to meeting that definition, and besides, they were inside my closed garage. The next morning, I drove to the HOA office, which was located in a small building near the community clubhouse. Barbara was there with another woman I did not recognize, both sitting behind a desk covered in folders and papers. The woman with Barbara appeared to be in her 30s, wearing a polo shirt with an embroidered logo that read Pinnacle Property Management. "Mr. Newland," Barbara said when I walked in, "do you have the payment for your fines?" "No," I said firmly. "I am here to pick up my property." "You had no right to take it, and I am not paying anything." The other woman stood up and extended her hand. "I am Jennifer from Pinnacle Property Management. We have been contracted to help enforce HOA regulations in this community." Mrs. Hendricks followed proper protocol in confiscating items that violated community covenants. I did not shake her hand. "Show me exactly where in the HOA documents it says you can enter my private garage and take my personal belongings." Barbara pulled out a binder and flipped through some pages. "Right here. Section 12.7 clearly states that commercial-grade equipment cannot be stored where it is visible from common areas. Your garage door was open, making the items visible." "My garage door was not open," I said. "And even if it was, those are extension cords, not commercial equipment. They are consumer products that anyone can buy at any hardware store. The serial numbers on the cords indicate they are industrial-grade products marketed for commercial use," Jennifer said, consulting a tablet. "That makes them subject to regulation under the current covenants." This was getting absurd. "I want my cords back right now, or I am calling the police." Barbara smiled that infuriating smile. "Go ahead and call them. We are well within our rights. The cords will be returned when you pay the fines. Until then, they are locked in our secure storage facility." I left the office and sat in my truck, trying to decide my next move. Calling the police seemed like the logical choice, but I wanted to make sure I had all my documentation in order first. I drove home and started gathering evidence. I found my purchase receipts from Home Depot, dated 3 months ago, showing I had bought 3 industrial extension cords. Each receipt listed the model numbers, purchase price, and most importantly, the serial numbers of each cord. I also had photos on my phone from when I organized my garage last month. The pictures clearly showed the cords hanging on the pegboard, and I could even zoom in to see the serial numbers printed on the orange coating. I compiled everything into a folder and then called the Phoenix Police non-emergency number. The operator connected me to an officer who listened to my situation. He told me that while this sounded like a civil matter, the fact that someone entered my property and took items without permission could potentially be theft. He said I could file a report and an officer would come out to take my statement. Officer Davis arrived about an hour later. He was a calm, methodical guy in his 30s who took detailed notes while I explained everything. I showed him the receipts, the photos, and the empty hooks in my garage. I also showed him the section of HOA documents that Barbara had cited, and he agreed that it did not seem to give her authority to take personal property. "The problem is HOA disputes usually fall under civil law," Officer Davis explained. "But unauthorized entry and taking property could be criminal theft. I will file this report, and you can also file a separate report for trespassing since they entered your garage without permission. That gives you documentation if you need to take this to court." "Can you go to the HOA office and get my cords back?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not without more evidence that a crime was committed. Right now, it is your word against theirs about whether the garage door was open and whether they had implied permission. But this report establishes your claim to the property and the timeline. I would recommend sending the HOA a formal demand letter and filing a small claims case if they do not return your items within a reasonable time frame." After Officer Davis left, I felt frustrated, but at least I had official documentation. I spent the evening researching Arizona property law and HOA regulations. What I discovered was interesting. While HOAs in Arizona have broad authority to enforce covenants, they cannot violate state law in doing so. Taking someone's personal property without their consent is theft under Arizona revised statutes, regardless of what HOA rules might say. Additionally, entering private property without permission could constitute trespassing. I drafted a formal demand letter that night, citing the specific statutes Barbara had violated. I included copies of my purchase receipts and photos, along with the police report number. I gave her 72 hours to return my property, or I would file charges and a civil lawsuit. I sent it via certified mail the next morning. 2 days later, I got a response. But instead of my cords being returned, I received a notice from the HOA that I was being fined an additional $500, threatening legal action against HOA officers in the performance of their duties. This was listed as a violation of Section 18.3 of the Covenants, which supposedly prohibited harassment of HOA board members. I read that section carefully. It did mention that homeowners should not harass board members, but it defined harassment as repeated unwanted contact, verbal abuse, or threatening behavior. Sending one formal legal demand letter did not meet any of those criteria. Barbara was clearly retaliating against me for standing up to her. That same afternoon, Tom called me. "Hey, Jake, I do not know if this matters, but I just saw Barbara in her garage and she has some orange extension cords hanging on her wall. They look a lot like the ones you were looking for." My heart started pounding. "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure." I was walking my dog past her place, and her garage door was up. I saw 3 heavy-duty orange cords with black ends. Made me think of what you told me. I grabbed my phone and carefully walked down the street toward Barbara's house, which was about 6 houses down from mine. Her garage door was still open, and I could see inside clearly from the sidewalk. There, hanging on her garage wall, were 3 orange and black extension cords that looked identical to mine. I took photos from the public sidewalk, making sure I was not on her property. The images clearly showed the cords, and I could even make out part of the serial numbers printed on the orange coating. I zoomed in as much as my phone would allow and took multiple shots from different angles. Back at home, I compared the photos to my purchase records. The serial numbers visible in the photos matched my receipts exactly. These were absolutely, without question, my cords. Barbara had not taken them to any secure HOA storage facility. She had taken them for herself and hung them in her own garage. This changed everything. This was not an HOA overreach issue anymore. This was straight-up theft. I called Officer Davis and explained the new development. He said this gave them probable cause to investigate further, since I now had photographic evidence that the allegedly confiscated property was in Barbara's personal possession, rather than HOA storage. He said he would send an officer to speak with Barbara. About 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was Barbara, and she was furious. "How dare you send the police to my home?" she shouted. "I am reporting you to the HOA board for harassment. You are going to be fined heavily for this." "Barbara, those are my extension cords in your garage," I said calmly. "The serial numbers match my purchase records. You told me they were in HOA secure storage, but instead you took them for your personal use. That is theft." "I have no idea what you are talking about," she stammered. "Those cords are mine. I purchased them months ago." "Then you will have no problem showing the police your purchase records," I replied, "because I have mine and they prove those exact cords with those exact serial numbers belong to me." She hung up. 20 minutes later, Officer Davis called me back. "So I spoke with Mrs. Hendricks," he said. "She claims the cords in her garage are hers, and that your cords are still in HOA storage. She refused to show me her purchase receipts and told me to leave her property. However, I was able to observe the serial numbers on the cords from where I was standing in her driveway, and I noted them in my report. If those numbers match your receipts, we have enough for theft charges." I read him the serial numbers from my Home Depot receipts. They matched perfectly. "All 3 cords." "Okay," Officer Davis said. "That is pretty conclusive. I am going to consult with my supervisor and the county attorney's office. This appears to be theft by taking with fraudulent intent. I will be in touch." The next day, I received a formal notice from the HOA that my membership privileges were suspended pending a disciplinary hearing. The notice claimed I had violated multiple covenant sections by harassing the HOA president, making false accusations, and involving law enforcement in a civil dispute. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. I immediately contacted an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. Her name was Rachel Morrison, and she had great reviews for handling exactly these kinds of cases. We met at her office in downtown Phoenix that afternoon. "This is one of the more blatant cases I have seen," Rachel said after reviewing all my documents. "She essentially stole your property under color of authority, then lied about where it was being stored while she kept it for herself. The fact that the serial numbers match your receipts makes this an open and shut case." "What about the HOA hearing?" I asked. "We will attend and make it clear that they are retaliating against you for reporting a crime. If they fine you or restrict your property rights based on this, that is additional grounds for a lawsuit. Arizona law is very clear that HOAs cannot retaliate against homeowners who exercise their legal rights." Rachel sent a letter to the HOA board and their management company, putting them on notice that any further retaliation would result in immediate legal action. She also sent a letter to Barbara personally, demanding the return of my property within 24 hours, or we would pursue criminal charges and a civil lawsuit for theft, conversion of property, and abuse of authority. The response came not from Barbara, but from Pinnacle Property Management. They claimed there had been a misunderstanding, and that upon further review, the items in question did not actually violate any HOA covenants. They said I could retrieve my cords from the HOA office the following morning. "That is an admission," Rachel said when I showed her the email. "They are backing down because they know they screwed up, but we are not letting this go. She still stole your property and lied about it." The next morning, I went to the HOA office with Rachel. Jennifer from Pinnacle Property Management was there, but Barbara was notably absent. Jennifer handed me 3 extension cords without saying much beyond asking me to sign a receipt acknowledging I had received them. I examined each cord carefully. The serial numbers matched. These were definitely my cords, but I was not signing anything yet. "Where is Barbara?" Rachel asked. "Mrs. Hendricks is taking some personal time," Jennifer said carefully. "These extension cords were photographed in Mrs. Hendricks' personal garage 2 days ago," Rachel said. "My client was told they were in secure HOA storage. Can you explain that discrepancy?" Jennifer looked uncomfortable. I was not aware of the specific storage location. I was told they were in HOA possession. In other words, Barbara lied to you too, Rachel said. She took these for her personal use and told everyone, including you and the police, that they were in official HOA storage. That is theft and filing a false report. We left with my cords, but Rachel was not done. She filed a formal complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOA management companies. She also sent a detailed letter to the Sunset Ridge HOA board members, outlining everything Barbara had done and demanding her resignation. The HOA board scheduled an emergency meeting 3 days later. I attended along with Rachel and about 30 other homeowners who had apparently also had issues with Barbara's overreach. The meeting was tense from the start. One homeowner, an elderly man named Richard, stood up and described how Barbara had fined him $800 for having a small crack in his driveway. Another woman, Susan, talked about being fined for having the wrong shade of beige on her house trim, even though she had the paint color pre-approved before painting. It became clear that Barbara had been abusing her position for months, interpreting rules in the most draconian way possible and pocketing fine money that was supposed to go to the HOA general fund. The board members looked genuinely shocked by some of the stories. When it was my turn to speak, I presented all my evidence: the receipts, the photos, the police reports, and the timeline of events. I showed them pictures of my cords hanging in Barbara's garage and explained how she had lied to multiple people about where they were stored. "This is not an HOA enforcement issue," I said. "This is criminal theft. She entered my property without permission, took items that belonged to me, lied about where they were, and kept them for her personal use. She only returned them when I got a lawyer and threatened criminal charges." One of the board members, a man named Craig, spoke up. "Where is Barbara? She should be here to defend herself." Another board member, Maria, said she had tried calling Barbara multiple times but got no answer. "I drove by her house before coming here. Her car is not there, and it looks like no one is home." The board voted unanimously to suspend Barbara from her position pending a full investigation. They also voted to hire an independent auditor to review the HOA finances, specifically looking at fine collections and how that money was spent. Over the next week, more information came to light. The auditor discovered that Barbara had collected over $40,000 in fines during her 6 months as president, but only $15,000 had been deposited into the HOA accounts. The other $25,000 was missing. She had been using a personal PayPal account to collect some fines, telling homeowners it was an approved payment method, then never transferring that money to the HOA. Officer Davis contacted me again. "We have enough evidence to charge Mrs. Hendricks with theft, fraud, and embezzlement. The problem is we cannot find her. She has not been at her house in over a week. Her phone is disconnected. Do you know if she has any family in the area?" I did not, but Tom did. He told me Barbara's sister lived in Flagstaff. Officer Davis followed up on that lead, and apparently Barbara had driven up there the day after I got my cords back. The Flagstaff police found her staying at her sister's house and arrested her on the outstanding warrant from Phoenix. Barbara was extradited back to Phoenix and charged with multiple counts of theft, embezzlement, and fraud. The specific charges related to my case were theft of property valued over $1,000 and filing a false report to police. The embezzlement charges were separate, related to the HOA funds she had stolen. The preliminary hearing was held about 6 weeks after her arrest. I had to attend to testify about what happened. Barbara showed up with a public defender, looking much different than the confident, aggressive HOA president I had dealt with. She seemed smaller somehow, more defeated. The prosecutor presented my receipts, the photographs, the police reports, and the timeline of events. Barbara's attorney tried to argue that this was a misunderstanding, that Barbara genuinely believed she had authority to confiscate the cords under HOA rules. But the prosecutor pointed out that even if that were true, which it was not, Barbara had lied about where the cords were stored. She told multiple people they were in secure HOA storage when they were actually hanging in her personal garage. That showed intent to permanently deprive me of my property, which is the legal definition of theft. The judge agreed there was sufficient evidence for the case to proceed to trial. Barbara's bail was set at $50,000, which she apparently could not afford, so she remained in Maricopa County Jail. Rachel filed a civil lawsuit on my behalf as well, seeking compensation for the value of the stolen property, emotional distress, attorney fees, and punitive damages. We also sued Pinnacle Property Management for negligent supervision and the HOA board for failing to provide proper oversight of Barbara's actions. The civil case moved faster than the criminal one. Pinnacle Property Management settled quickly, not wanting the publicity. They paid $20,000, which more than covered my attorney fees and the value of my property. The HOA board also settled, agreeing to pay $15,000 and to implement new oversight procedures to prevent future abuse by board members. The criminal case went to trial 4 months after Barbara's arrest. I testified about coming home to find my garage open and my cords missing, about Barbara's phone call where she demanded $700 to return my property, and about discovering the cords in her garage. The prosecutor also called Officer Davis, Tom, and the Home Depot employee who had helped me find my original purchase records. Barbara's defense was weak. Her attorney argued that she had made mistakes, but had not intended to steal anything. He claimed she took the cords because she genuinely believed they violated HOA rules, and that she brought them to her own garage temporarily, because the HOA office was being renovated, and there was no secure storage available. The prosecutor tore this apart on cross-examination. She showed that the HOA office had never been renovated. She presented evidence that Barbara had been collecting fines through her personal PayPal account and pocketing the money. She argued that Barbara had established a pattern of abusing her authority for personal gain, and stealing my extension cords was just one example of that pattern. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found Barbara guilty on all counts related to my case: theft, filing a false police report, and abuse of authority. She was also convicted on multiple counts of embezzlement related to the HOA funds. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Rachel told me that Barbara was likely facing significant prison time given the amount of money involved and the number of counts she was convicted on. At the sentencing hearing, the judge heard statements from multiple victims, including me. I kept mine brief, explaining how Barbara had violated my home, my privacy, and my trust. I talked about how the HOA is supposed to be an organization that protects property values and creates community. But Barbara had turned it into her personal fiefdom where she could abuse homeowners and steal from them with impunity. The judge was not sympathetic to Barbara. He sentenced her to 5 years in prison for the embezzlement charges and 18 months for the theft charges, to run concurrently. He also ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA and to the individual homeowners she had stolen from, including me. As Barbara was led away in handcuffs, I felt a mix of emotions: relief that justice had been served, anger at everything she had put me and my neighbors through, and sadness that someone had thrown their life away over extension cords and HOA fine money. The Sunset Ridge HOA held elections for a new board the following month. The homeowners elected people who promised transparency, reasonable enforcement of rules, and respect for property rights. One of the first things the new board did was revise the covenants to make it clear that HOA officers could never enter private property without explicit written permission, and could never confiscate personal property under any circumstances. They also implemented a fine appeal process, where homeowners could challenge fines before an independent mediator. Any fine over $200 had to be approved by a majority vote of the entire board, not just the president acting alone. Tom was elected to the board and became the new treasurer. His first action was to implement complete financial transparency, with monthly reports posted on the community website showing exactly where every dollar came from and where it went. Life in Sunset Ridge slowly returned to normal. The community pool reopened after being closed during the investigation. The monthly newsletters started focusing on social events rather than violation notices. Neighbors started talking to each other again, instead of being afraid that anything they said might result in a fine. I organized my garage again, with my 3 extension cords hanging prominently on the pegboard where they belonged. Every time I looked at them, I was reminded of the importance of standing up for yourself when someone abuses their authority. If I had just paid Barbara's illegal fine and moved on, she would have continued stealing from other homeowners, and who knows how much worse it would have gotten. Several of my neighbors thanked me for taking action. Richard, the elderly man who had been fined for the driveway crack, told me he had been considering selling his house and moving because of Barbara's constant harassment. Susan, who had been fined for the paint color, said she had actually been preparing to file for bankruptcy because she could not afford all of Barbara's fines. The new board had voided all of her fines after determining they were improperly assessed. I learned that Barbara's sister in Flagstaff had tried to help her flee to Mexico when the investigation started heating up. That was why she had gone up there and disconnected her phone. The sister was charged with aiding and abetting, but received probation since Barbara never actually made it out of the country. Pinnacle Property Management lost the contract with Sunset Ridge. The new board hired a local management company with better reviews and a track record of working with homeowners rather than against them. Jennifer, the compliance officer who had backed up Barbara's lies, was fired. About a year after everything happened, I ran into Officer Davis at a coffee shop near my work. He remembered me and asked how things were going in the neighborhood. "Much better," I told him. "New board, new management company, actual reasonable people in charge." "Good," he said. That case was one of the stranger ones I have worked. Usually HOA disputes are pretty boring, just neighbors arguing about fence heights or whatever. But actual theft and embezzlement, that does not happen often. "I am just glad I kept all my receipts and took photos," I said. "Without those serial numbers, it would have been her word against mine." "That is the truth," Officer Davis agreed. "Always document everything, especially when dealing with anyone who has authority over you." I took that lesson to heart. I started keeping meticulous records of everything related to my house and the HOA. Photos dated and time-stamped, receipts filed and organized, copies of every letter and email. It might seem excessive, but after what I went through with Barbara, I was not taking any chances. The civil settlements I received paid for a few nice upgrades to my house. I installed a smart garage door opener that sent alerts to my phone whenever the door opened or closed. I also added security cameras covering my garage, driveway, and front yard. If anyone ever tried to enter my property without permission again, I would have video evidence. I also bought a generator to go with those extension cords. A nice 7,500-watt model that could power my essential appliances during the summer monsoon season when power outages were common. During a particularly bad storm that July, my generator kept my refrigerator, air conditioning, and internet running while most of the neighborhood was dark and sweltering. Several neighbors came over to charge their phones and cool off. It felt good to be able to help them out. Tom and the rest of the new HOA board did an excellent job turning things around. They organized community events like movie nights by the pool and a neighborhood watch program. They negotiated better rates for landscaping and pool maintenance, actually reducing HOA dues by 10%. And most importantly, they treated homeowners with respect and common sense. When minor issues came up, like someone parking their RV on the street for a few days or having weeds in their yard, the new board would send friendly reminders rather than immediate fines. They recognized that people have lives and sometimes things slip through the cracks. The goal was to maintain the community, not to punish residents. I served on the Architectural Review Committee for a while, helping review requests for home modifications. It was eye-opening to see how many requests Barbara had denied for arbitrary reasons. Someone wanted to add a pergola to their backyard. Denied because it was not mentioned specifically in the covenants. Someone wanted to plant a vegetable garden. Denied because only ornamental plants were allowed. We reversed those kinds of interpretations and adopted a policy that if something was not specifically prohibited and did not harm property values, it was allowed. Common sense prevailed. My experience with Barbara also made me more aware of HOA abuse in general. I joined an Arizona homeowners' rights group that advocates for legislative reforms to limit HOA power and provide better protections for residents. I testified before a state legislative committee about what happened to me and how Arizona law needs to be clearer about the boundaries of HOA authority. Some reforms did pass. The legislature enacted a law requiring HOAs to carry theft insurance and bond their board members, so if a president or treasurer steals HOA funds, there is insurance to cover the loss. They also strengthened the laws around HOA entry onto private property, making it explicit that HOAs need written permission except in genuine emergencies. Barbara ended up serving 3 years of her 5-year sentence before being released on parole. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that she moved to Nevada after her release and was working some retail job. She was required to pay monthly restitution payments, which would probably take her decades to complete given the amount she owed. Her house in Sunset Ridge was foreclosed on during her incarceration. A nice young couple bought it and completely renovated it. They turned out to be great neighbors, always friendly and involved in community events. It was like Barbara's negative energy had been completely erased and replaced with something positive. Looking back on the whole experience, I am glad I stood my ground and did not let Barbara intimidate me into paying those bogus fines. It would have been easier to just give her the $700 and forget about it. But it was never really about the money or even the extension cords. It was about the principle that no one, not even an HOA president, has the right to steal from you and abuse their authority. The Phoenix heat was brutal that summer, hitting 115 degrees on some days, but whenever the power went out, I had my generator and my extension cords ready to go. Every time I plugged them in and heard that reliable hum of electricity flowing, I felt a small sense of victory. Barbara had tried to take them from me, had lied and abused her power, but in the end, justice prevailed. My advice to anyone dealing with an abusive HOA is simple. Document everything, know your rights, and do not be afraid to stand up for yourself. Most HOA board members are reasonable people trying to maintain their community. But when you encounter someone like Barbara who sees the position as a way to control and profit, you have to fight back. The laws are on your side, especially when someone crosses the line from annoying enforcement into actual criminal behavior. Theft is theft, whether it is done by a random stranger or your HOA president. The badge of authority does not give anyone the right to violate your property rights or steal your belongings. I still live in Sunset Ridge, and I plan to stay here for the foreseeable future. The community has been completely transformed from the toxic environment Barbara created into an actual neighborhood where people look out for each other. Property values have even increased since the new board took over, probably because potential buyers are no longer scared off by horror stories about the crazy HOA president. Sometimes I see my extension cords hanging in the garage, and I think about that moment when Tom told me he had seen them in Barbara's garage. That was the turning point, the evidence that transformed this from a he said, she said dispute into a clear-cut case of theft. Those serial numbers, printed in small text on the orange coating, were the key to everything. It is funny how something as mundane as an extension cord serial number can bring down someone who thought they were untouchable. Barbara had gotten away with abusing homeowners for months, embezzling thousands of dollars, and no one had been able to stop her. But she got greedy and careless, and those 9 digits printed on each cord proved to be her undoing. I framed the purchase receipts and hung them in my garage as a reminder. Not because I am proud of what happened, but because I never want to forget the lesson. Keep your records, stand your ground, and trust that the system works if you give it the evidence it needs. The monsoon season came and went. The generator performed flawlessly, and life continued in the Arizona desert. The palm trees swayed in the hot winds, the community pool sparkled in the sun, and neighbors waved to each other as they picked up their mail. This was what an HOA community was supposed to be, and it only took one person standing up against a bully to help make it happen. Years from now, when people move into Sunset Ridge, they probably will not know the story of Barbara and the stolen extension cords. They will just enjoy living in a well-maintained community with a reasonable HOA board. And that is fine. The point was never to be remembered as the guy who took down the corrupt HOA president. The point was to stop the abuse and make things better for everyone. Mission accomplished.